The microphone made that high, thin sound when my father tapped it. The kind of sound that cuts through a room and tells 200 people to put down their forks and look up. I was sitting at table 14, near the back, next to a centerpiece that was leaning slightly because someone had bumped it earlier. My napkin was still folded in my lap. I hadn't touched the salmon. My brother Daniel was up at the head table with his new wife, Claire, both of them glowing the way people glow when they've spent a year planning something and it's finally happening. Claire's hand was on Daniel's wrist. The string lights above the dance floor were doing that slow, warm thing string lights do. And my father, Richard Vale, lifted his glass. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said, in that voice he used when he wanted a room to feel his presence. "To celebrate my son. My only son who actually made something of himself." He smiled when he said it. That was the part that hurt. Not the words. The smile. A few people laughed nervously. Some of them turned to look at me, then looked away fast, the way you do when you've witnessed something you weren't supposed to. My mother, sitting 3 seats from my father at the head table, kept her eyes on her wine glass. She didn't lift her head. She hadn't lifted her head for me in 22 years. I felt the heat climb up the back of my neck, slow and patient, the way it always did when he made me the punchline of a joke I never agreed to be part of. I was 38 years old. I had flown in from Norfolk that morning. I had been awake since 4. I had a quiet weight in my chest that I had learned how to carry without anyone seeing. I lifted my own glass. Just a small lift. Not in agreement. Just to give my hands something to do. Across the room, near the entrance to the ballroom, a man in a dark suit had just stepped inside. Tall. Silver at the temples. He didn't sit. He didn't move toward a table. He stood with his hands folded in front of him the way someone stands when they're waiting for a signal, and his eyes were on me. I knew that man. He didn't belong at this wedding. He didn't know my father. He didn't know Daniel. He had no reason in the world to be standing in the back of a Charleston wedding venue on a Saturday evening in October. But there he was. And my father, holding his glass, hadn't noticed him yet. "To Daniel," and my father said, his voice rising, for proving that at least one of my children was worth the investment. The laughter this time was smaller. Sharper. The kind that catches in the throat. Claire's smile faltered for a second. Daniel's didn't. I set my glass down. I didn't drink to that toast. I sat very still, and I watched the man at the back of the room, and I waited. Because the thing about being underestimated for 38 years is that you learn the difference between silence and surrender. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I was not the only person in this room who knew what I had become. My name is Eleanor Vale. I am the older child. By 11 months, which my father has always treated as a clerical error rather than a fact. When people ask what I do, I usually say I work for the Navy. That's true. It's also the smallest, flattest version of the truth I can offer. I learned a long time ago that the full version made strangers uncomfortable and made family members angry. So I shrunk it down until it fit through the door of a Vale family dinner without scraping the frame. My father is a developer. Commercial real estate, mostly, in the Charleston and Mount Pleasant area. He builds shopping centers and mid-rise office buildings and writes opinion pieces for the local business journal about how nobody works hard anymore. He is 66 years old, 6 feet tall, with the kind of handshake that's a little too firm and the kind of laugh that's a little too loud. And he has spent his entire adult life convinced that his daughter was a disappointment. I think it started when I was 8, and I told him I didn't want to take over the business. He had taken me to a job site, a half-built strip mall off Highway 17, and he had walked me through the framing, pointing out where the anchor tenant would go, and he had said, *y one day, Eleanor. All of this. And I had looked up at him, and I had said, I want to be on a ship. He laughed. He patted my head. He told my mother in the car on the way home, and they both laughed. Then Daniel was born, and Daniel was a boy, and Daniel liked watching my father sign contracts at the kitchen table, and somewhere between my 9th birthday and my 10th. I stopped being the child my father was building a future for. I joined the Navy at 18. My father said I'd be home in 6 months. He said I didn't have the stomach for it. He said women like me, soft women, smart-mouthed women, women who read too many books, didn't last in environments that required real discipline. I did not come home in 6 months. I did not come home for a lot of things. I missed Christmases. I missed my grandmother's funeral, because I was on a deployment I could not discuss. I missed Daniel's college graduation. I missed the opening of my father's 3rd shopping plaza, which he never let me forget. What he didn't know, what he refused to know, because asking would have meant admitting he might have been wrong about me, was what I had been doing during all those missed dinners. I had been working. Quietly. Methodically. The way I do everything. I had been promoted 6 times. I had attended the Naval War College. I had served on 3 ships and commanded 1. I had been deployed to places my father couldn't find on a map and would never read about in the newspaper. I had spent 2 years at the Pentagon, in a building my father would have given his left arm to walk into. Doing work that was classified at a level that made the words and national security a sound casual. And just before I flew home for Daniel's wedding, I had received a phone call. The kind of phone call that only comes once in a career. The kind that changes the title on your dress uniform and the way people stand when you walk into a room. But I hadn't told my family. Not yet. Because I knew what would happen if I did. My father would dismiss it. My mother would say something polite and forgettable. Daniel would make a joke about how the Navy must be desperate. And the moment would belong to them, the way every moment in our family belonged to them, and I would walk out of that conversation feeling smaller than I had walked in. So I had kept it to myself. I had flown in. I had checked into the hotel. I had put on a navy blue dress, civilian, nothing that hinted at rank, and I had driven to the venue with my hands steady on the wheel and my chest quiet. I had told myself, get through the wedding. Smile for Daniel. Leave on Sunday. What I had not told myself, because I didn't think I'd need to, was that my father would use his son's wedding toast to humiliate me in front of 200 people. But that man in the back of the room, the one in the dark suit, with the silver at his temples, he had known. He had known before I did that tonight wasn't going to go the way I had planned. And he had come anyway. There is a photograph my father keeps in his office. I've seen it 100 times. It's framed on the wall behind his desk, between his Rotary Club plaque and a picture of him shaking hands with the governor at a ribbon cutting. In the photograph, my father is 42 years old. He's standing next to my brother Daniel, who is 6, and they're both wearing Little League uniforms because my father coached Daniel's team for 2 seasons. My father has his arm around Daniel's shoulders. Daniel is grinning, missing a front tooth. I am not in the photograph. There are no photographs of me in my father's office. There is one of me in the hallway of my parents' house, but it's my high school graduation portrait, and it's been moved 3 times in the last decade, each time to a slightly less prominent wall. The last time I visited, 2 years ago, it was hanging in the laundry room, above a basket of folded towels. I didn't say anything about it. I never did. My mother, Diane, is a quieter problem. She is not cruel the way my father is cruel. She is absent in a way that is almost worse, because absence cannot be confronted. When my father said something sharp at the dinner table when I was a child, my mother would close her eyes for half a second, as if she were waiting for the moment to parse. And then she would parse the green beans. She loved me. I believe she loved me. But she loved peace more. Daniel is harder to talk about, because Daniel is not a bad person. He's just a person who grew up in a house where being the favorite was easy, and he never questioned why. He's a financial advisor now. He drives a German sedan and lives in a townhouse in Mount Pleasant and calls my mother every Sunday. He sent me a text on my birthday last year that said Happy B-Day, sis, hope all is well. No punctuation. No name. He had not seen me in person in 4 years. But here is the part nobody in my family talks about. The part they have chosen to forget. When I was 19, 8 months into my Navy career, my mother got sick. A bad sick. The kind that requires 3 months of treatment at a hospital in Atlanta because the local doctors couldn't handle it. My father's business was in trouble that year. He had overextended on a development that wasn't selling, and the medical bills started arriving. And there was a stretch of about 14 months where the Vale family was a paycheck away from losing the house on Trad Street. I sent money home. Every month. For 3 years. I was a junior enlisted sailor. I was making almost nothing. I lived on base, ate in the mess, and I sent my mother's medical co-pays and a chunk of the mortgage back to Charleston, and nobody in that house ever acknowledged it out loud. My father told people at his club that he had weathered a tough season through grit. My mother thanked me once, quietly, on the phone, and then we never spoke of it again. Daniel was in college. My father paid for that, somehow. Out-of-state tuition. A fraternity. A used BMW for his junior year. I came home on leave when my mother was in remission, and my father took me out to dinner at a steakhouse downtown, and I thought maybe, finally, he was going to say it. He was going to say thank you. He was going to say I was wrong about you. What he said instead, halfway through his second bourbon, was, Eleanor, it's not too late to find a real career. Something with stability. Your brother could probably get you in at his firm when he finishes school. I excused myself to the restroom. I stood at the sink for a long time. Then I came back to the table, and I ordered dessert, and I smiled, and I did not bring it up again. That was the moment I understood that my father was never going to see me. Not because he couldn't. Because he had decided, somewhere along the way, that seeing me would mean admitting he had been wrong, and Richard Vale did not admit he was wrong. So I stopped trying. I built my career on the assumption that my family would never know what I did, and that was fine. I had other people. I had my crew. I had a chief petty officer named Marcus Webb who became closer to me than my own brother. I had a mentor, a 3-star, who once told me that the Navy was the only family that had ever shown up for him too. And I had Admiral James Holloway. But we'll get to him. The toast went on longer than it should have. After the line about Daniel being the one who made something of himself, my father did what he always did when he felt the room was with him. He kept going. He told a story about Daniel's college acceptance. He told another story about Daniel's first job. He told the story of how Daniel had met Claire at a charity golf tournament, which was a lie. They had met on a dating app. And Claire had told me so the one time we'd had coffee together, but my father preferred the golf tournament version. Then he said, Ian, of course, we have Eleanor here too. The room shifted. People who had been politely smiling started to look uncomfortable. My daughter Eleanor, and my father said, gesturing toward me with his glass, the perpetual student of life. Always finding herself. Always on some adventure we don't quite understand. A few uneasy chuckles. Claire's mother, sitting 2 seats from mine, looked down at her plate. I joke with my friends, and my father continued, that Eleanor's been in the Navy so long, she must be running the place by now. Big larf. He paused for it. Or maybe just running errands. The larf got bigger. My Uncle Ron, who has never been kind to anyone in his life, actually slapped the table. I kept my face still. I had spent 20 years training my face to stay still in rooms full of men who underestimated me. This room was not the hardest one I had been in. But my throat was tight. I will not pretend otherwise. Anyway, and my father said, lifting his glass higher, heir to Daniel. The son who made it. The one who proved that the Vale name still means something. Glasses went up around the room. Slowly. Some people clinked. Most didn't. Daniel was looking down at the table. Just for a second. I caught it. He had heard it. He had heard all of it. He could have stood up, just then, and said something, anything, and he didn't. He picked up his glass, smiled at his bride, and drank. That was the moment my chest stopped feeling tight and started feeling cold. I had spent 20 years believing that Daniel didn't know. That he was just the son, that he was just born into the favor, that he wasn't responsible for what our father did. But he was 37 years old. He had heard every joke at every dinner. He had watched my mother go quiet 1,000 times. And tonight, on his wedding day, with 200 people watching, he had picked up his glass and drunk to a toast that had used his sister as a punchline. He knew. He had always known. I think that was the hardest part. Harder than my father's voice. Harder than the laughter. I stood up. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say anything. I just stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked toward the back of the ballroom, toward the exit, toward where I had parked my car. I was going to leave. That was my plan. I was going to get in my rental car, drive back to the hotel, sleep 4 hours, and fly back to Norfolk in the morning. I had a life there. I had work. I had people who knew exactly who I was. I did not need this. I was almost to the door when the man in the dark suit stepped in front of me. Captain Vale, he said. Very quietly. I stopped. Nobody at that wedding had called me captain. Nobody at that wedding even knew that word applied to me. Admiral Holloway sent me, he said. He's just outside. He'd like a moment, if you have one. I looked past him, through the open doors, into the hotel lobby. And there, standing under the chandelier in the foyer, in his dress blues, was Admiral James Holloway. 4 stars on each shoulder. Hands behind his back. Watching me. I had not invited him. I had not told him about the wedding. I had not told anyone in the Navy where I was going to be that weekend. And yet, here he was. I turned around and looked back at the ballroom. My father was still standing at the microphone, laughing about something with the maid of honor. Daniel had his arm around Claire. My mother was looking at her wine. None of them had noticed I had stood up. None of them had noticed I had walked away. I turned back to the man in the dark suit. Tell the Admiral, I said, to come in. The man in the dark suit, his name was Commander Reyes, I learned later, and he was Admiral Holloway's aide, did not go get the Admiral right away. He looked at me carefully, the way a person looks at someone they are sworn to protect. He said, are you sure? It was a real question. He was giving me the chance to say no. He was giving me the chance to walk out the door, get in my car, and let the Vale family go on believing whatever they wanted to believe about me. The Admiral could be told that the moment had passed. Nobody would ever know. I thought about it. I thought about it for maybe 4 seconds. Then I thought about my mother's face, 22 years ago, when I handed her a check at the kitchen table and she folded it without looking at me. I thought about the photograph in my father's office. I thought about Daniel raising his glass. I'm sure, I said. Commander Reyes nodded once. He turned and walked out into the lobby. I stood at the back of the ballroom and watched my father move from the microphone back to his seat. He was still smiling. He was clapping people on the shoulder as he walked past them. He looked like a man who had just delivered the speech of his life. He had no idea what was about to walk through the door. It's a strange thing, watching someone you love and resent at the same time, in the last minute before their life changes. There's a kind of grief in it. A kind of mercy, too. Because for one more minute, my father got to be Richard Vale, the developer, the patriarch, the man who had made his son and dismissed his daughter. And he got to feel like he was right about everything. I gave him that minute. Then the doors opened, and Admiral Holloway walked in. The first person to notice was a woman near the door. She glanced up, registered the uniform, and her hand froze halfway to her mouth with a piece of bread in it. Then the man next to her looked. Then the table next to that one. Dress blues at a Charleston wedding are not common. 4 stars on a set of dress blues are something most civilians have never seen in their entire lives, and would not know how to interpret if they did. Admiral Holloway is 64 years old. He is taller than my father by about 2 inches. His hair is silver, cut very short. He has a scar on his left jaw from a helicopter incident in 1991 that he does not talk about. His ribbons go almost to his shoulder. He walked through that ballroom the way he walked through everything, without hurrying, without looking around. With the absolute knowledge that the room would adjust to him and not the other way around. He walked directly to me. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, came to attention, and saluted. I returned it. It was so quiet in that ballroom you could hear the string lights humming. Captain, he said. Admiral, I said. He turned, just slightly, and gestured toward the front of the room. Toward the head table. Toward my father, who was now standing with his glass halfway to his lips, his mouth slightly open, the smile gone. I'd like to address the room, if I may, Admiral Holloway said. With your permission. He was asking me. Not my father. Not Daniel. Me. I nodded. He walked toward the microphone. He did not rush. He did not introduce himself. He simply stepped up to the mic, adjusted it down by about an inch, and waited. The room had already gone silent. Even my Uncle Ron was silent. My father was still standing by his chair. He looked at the Admiral. He looked at me. He looked back at the Admiral. I could see him trying to do the math, trying to fit this new piece of information into the picture of the world he had built over 66 years. The picture didn't have room for it. Admiral Holloway leaned forward toward the microphone. Good evening, he said. My name is Admiral James Holloway. I'm the commander of the United States Fleet Forces Command. He paused. Let the words land. I'm not on the guest list. I apologize for the intrusion. But I was passing through Charleston tonight, and I learned that one of my officers was here, and I felt it would be wrong of me not to come in and offer my respects. He looked at my father. "Mr. Vale, he said, I believe." My father, to his credit, found his voice. "Yes, he said. Richard Vale." "Mr. Vale, I'd like to speak about your daughter, if I may." The room did not move. But before I tell you what Admiral Holloway said, I have to back up. Because what happened in the next 20 minutes only makes sense if you understand the months that led to it. 3 months before the wedding, I had been pulled into a closed-door meeting at the Pentagon. I had been told that my name was on a short list. A very short list. The kind of list that ends with 3 stars or 4. I was 48 hours away from learning whether I had been selected for a position that would make me, by a small but real measure, one of the highest-ranking women in the United States Navy. Admiral Holloway had been my mentor for almost 12 years. He had been the one to recommend me for the War College. He had been the one to push my name forward for command. He was not sentimental about it. He was, in his own words, an investor, and he believed in protecting his investments. When he heard, through some channel I will never fully understand, that my brother was getting married in Charleston and I had not requested any kind of ceremonial Navy presence, he had been quiet about it for 2 days. Then he had picked up the phone, called Commander Reyes, and said, find out where she'll be. We're going." I learned all of this later. After. I tell you now because I want you to understand that Admiral Holloway did not show up at that wedding by accident. He showed up because he had been watching, for 12 years, what my family had done to me, in the small ways that show up in a young officer's eyes when she comes back from leave. He had never said anything to me about it. He was not the kind of man who would. But he had decided, that weekend, that it was time. Meanwhile, my father had no idea that any of this was coming. My father, in the moments before Admiral Holloway walked through those doors, was feeling the way he always felt at family gatherings. He was the king of the room. He had just made his only son's wedding about himself, which was something he had been doing for 38 years, and the room had laughed, and that was confirmation enough. He had been so confident, in fact, that during the toast, he had added a line he had not planned. The line about Daniel being the son who proved the Vale name still means something. He had added it because he could. Because he could feel the laughter rising in the room, and he wanted to ride it. That line was the one that mattered. Because Admiral Holloway, walking through the lobby in the moment my father said those words, heard them. He heard them clearly, through the open doors. And the small kindness he had been planning to offer me, a quiet salute, a few words, a graceful exit, changed in his mind in the span of about 2 seconds. He decided, instead, to go to the microphone. So when my father stood by his chair, watching Admiral Holloway adjust the MIC, he was about to learn something. He was about to learn that confidence is a fragile thing when it is built on a foundation of being wrong about your own daughter. And the rest of the room, Daniel, Claire, my mother, my Uncle Ron, the 200 guests, the catering staff frozen by the kitchen doors, was about to learn it with him. "Mr. Vale, Admiral Holloway said, your daughter, Eleanor, has been an officer in the United States Navy for 20 years. I have known her for 12 of those years. I'd like to share, with your permission, some things about her career that I believe a father deserves to know." My father did not say anything. He was still standing. His hand was on the back of his chair. Admiral Holloway took that as consent. 12 years ago, he said, I met your daughter when she was a lieutenant, serving on the USS Bainbridge. She had been put in charge of a project that nobody else wanted. She finished it 3 weeks early. I noticed. His eyes moved across the room slowly. He was speaking to the whole audience now, not just my father. 10 years ago, I recommended her for the Naval War College. She graduated at the top of her class. I noticed that too. 8 years ago, she was given command of a destroyer in the Pacific. She was the youngest woman in her cohort to receive an independent command. She held that command for 2 years. She did not lose a single sailor. She brought every one of them home. He paused. 6 years ago, she was assigned to a task that I cannot describe in this room, in this state, in this country. I will tell you only that she was selected from a list of over 400 officers. And she completed the task in a manner that I have only seen perhaps 3 times in my career. I was watching my father's face. He was not breathing. 4 years ago, the Admiral said, she was promoted to captain, ahead of her peers, on the recommendation of 3 flag officers, including myself. 2 years ago, she was assigned to the Pentagon, in a directorate that reports directly to the Chief of Naval Operations. She has the highest security clearance the United States government issues. He stopped. He looked at me. Then he looked back at my father. 48 hours ago, he said, your daughter received word that she has been selected for promotion to the rank of Rear Admiral. She is one of the youngest officers in the Navy to receive this selection. The promotion will be formally announced next month. I came tonight to congratulate her in person. The silence in that ballroom was the deepest silence I have ever heard in a room with 200 people in it. My mother's hand went up to her mouth. Not slowly. Quickly. As if she had been struck. Daniel was staring at his plate. Claire was looking at me with something that was not quite shock and not quite pity. It was, I think, the look of a woman who had married into a family and was just now understanding the size of the mistake. My father was still standing. He had not moved at all. Admiral Holloway was not finished. Mr. Vale, he said, and his voice changed now. It was not louder. It was quieter. It was the voice of a man speaking to one other man across a long distance. I do not normally interrupt a family celebration. I have a daughter myself, and I would not appreciate it if a stranger walked into her wedding and addressed me. So I want to be very clear that I am not here to embarrass you. I am here because what I heard, walking through that lobby, was a man making a joke about his own daughter in front of 200 people. And I felt that, before I left this room tonight, that man should know who he was making a joke about. He paused. Your daughter has served this country for 20 years with a level of quiet excellence that most officers never reach. She has done it without asking you to be proud of her. She has done it without asking you to understand her. She sent money home for 3 years when your wife was sick. I know this because she has, on exactly one occasion, in 12 years, mentioned it to me, and only because I asked a direct question that she could not avoid answering. My mother made a sound. A small one. Half a word. She put both hands over her face. I do not know you, Mr. Vale, the Admiral continued. I have no right to judge you. But I know your daughter. And I would consider it a personal honor if you would, at some point, consider knowing her too. He stepped back from the microphone. He turned. He walked across that ballroom, through tables of frozen guests, past my Uncle Ron, past Claire's parents, past the catering staff, and he stopped in front of me. He saluted me again. I returned it. Then, in a voice that was not loud but that carried through the whole room, he said, Congratulations, Admiral Vale. He had used my future rank. Not my current one. He had announced it. And the room, 200 people who had just learned my name in a way they would never forget it, sat in absolute silence as a 4-star Admiral stood at attention in front of me. I want to be honest about what happened next, because if I told you that I felt triumphant, I would be lying. I felt very tired. That is the truth. I felt tired in a way that went back 22 years. I felt tired in my shoulders and in my throat and behind my eyes. The kind of tired you feel when something you have been carrying alone for a very long time is suddenly visible to other people, and you don't have to carry it the same way anymore. And your body doesn't know what to do with the space. Admiral Holloway saw it on my face. He did not say anything else. He stepped back, gave me a small nod, and walked toward the door. Commander Reyes was already holding it open. The Admiral did not look at my father again. He had said what he came to say. The door closed behind him. And then, slowly, the room came back to life. But it was not the same room. The first person to move was Claire's father. He was a quiet man, retired schoolteacher, grey cardigan even at his daughter's wedding. He stood up from his chair, walked across the ballroom, stopped at my table, and held out his hand. "I'm Walter Henderson," he said. "Claire's father. It's an honor, I shook his hand. I couldn't quite speak yet. "My brother served," he said quietly. "Vietnam. He didn't come back. I wanted to say thank you." He didn't wait for a response. He nodded, turned, and went back to his table. The second person was a woman I didn't recognize. Then a man. Then another. One by one, people I had never met, and a few I had, walked across that ballroom to where I was standing and said something quiet. Some of them said thank you. Some of them said congratulations. One older man, leaning on a cane, said, "I served under Holloway in the Gulf. He doesn't do that for just anyone." I shook a lot of hands. My father did not move from his chair. My mother sat at the head table with her hands still pressed to her face, and after a while I realized she was crying. Not loudly. The way she did everything. Quietly, so that nobody would have to acknowledge it. Daniel had not looked at me once. The DJ, who had been frozen behind his table the entire time, eventually figured out that the only thing he could do was play music again. He put on something slow and instrumental, and a few brave couples got up to dance, and the wedding tried, in its broken way, to remember what it was supposed to be. I sat back down at table 14. The salmon was cold. Claire came over. She was the first person for my family, and I count her as family now, even though she had only been a veil for 6 hours, to actually sit down next to me. She sat in the empty chair to my left. She didn't say anything for a long time. She was holding a glass of champagne with both hands. "I didn't know," as she finally said. "I know," I said. "He told me you were," as she stopped. She couldn't finish it. "I know what he told you." She looked at me. She had very blue eyes. She was 32 years old and she had just married into something she had not signed up for, and I felt sorry for her. "Eleanor," as she said, "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault." "I know. But I'm sorry anyway." We sat there for a minute. The music kept playing. "Is it true?" she said. "All of it? What he said?" "Yes." "And nobody in this family knew?" I looked at her. "They could have known," I said. "If they had ever asked." She nodded slowly. She drank her champagne. Then she stood up, walked over to Daniel, and said something to him that I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, Daniel's face went through about 4 different colors. He set down his glass. He stood up. He came across the room. He stopped in front of me. "Eleanor," he said. I waited. I didn't. He stopped. He started again. "I should have. I said. "You should have." I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just too tired to make it easier for him. He looked at me for a long moment. There was something in his face I hadn't seen in 20 years. Not since we were children, before he learned which side of the family he was supposed to be on. "Can I sit?" he asked. I gestured to the chair Claire had just left. Saturday. He didn't look at me. He looked at the centerpiece, which was still leaning. After a minute, he reached out and straightened it. "He's not going to apologize," Daniel said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I know." "I will, though. For what it's worth." I should have said something. A long time ago. "How long?" He thought about it. "Probably since I was about 15, he said. That was the most honest thing my brother had ever said to me. We sat there for a while. He didn't try to make it bigger than it was. He didn't try to make it smaller. He just sat next to me, and that was something we had not done in a very long time. Across the room, my father had finally sat down. He was staring at the tablecloth in front of him. He had not eaten. He had not touched his drink. He looked, for the first time in my life, like a man who did not know what to do. I did not go to him. I did not need to. The thing about consequences is that they don't usually arrive all at once. In the movies, the bad father has a breakdown at the dinner table and the family reconciles by morning. In real life, what actually happens is much smaller, much slower, and much more honest. My father did not speak to me for the rest of the wedding. He left early. He told my mother he had a headache. He walked out of the ballroom and got in the car alone and drove back to the house on Trad Street. My mother stayed. She came to find me, finally, around 11 o'clock. The dance floor had thinned out by then. She sat down across from me, and she had her hands folded in her lap the way she always did when she was about to say something difficult. "I owe you an apology," she said. I waited. She did not look up. 22 years ago, she said, when I was sick, you sent us money. You sent us money for 3 years. I never thanked you properly. I let your father pretend it was him. I know. I knew it was wrong, Eleanor. I knew it then. I let it happen because, her voice broke. She steadied it. Because I was afraid of him. And that is not a reason. That is just the truth. She finally looked up. I should have stood up for you a long time ago. I'm sorry I waited until a stranger had to do it. I didn't know what to say to that. So I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. It was not forgiveness. It was just a hand. But it was the first time I had touched my mother in years. She held on tight. She did not let go for a long time. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and drove to the airport. I was supposed to fly back to Norfolk at noon. I had a meeting Monday morning. I had a life waiting for me. But on the way to the airport, I made a detour. I drove past the house on Trad Street. I didn't stop. I just drove past it. My father was on the front porch. He was sitting in the rocking chair my grandmother had left him. He had a cup of coffee in his hand. He was not drinking it. He was just sitting there, looking at the street. He saw my rental car. He stood up. I slowed down. I didn't stop. I rolled down the window. We looked at each other for about 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Long enough. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. There was nothing to say that could be said in 3 seconds, and we both knew it. I drove on. I flew back to Norfolk that afternoon. A week later, I received a letter. Handwritten. My father's handwriting. It was 3 pages long. I read it twice and then I put it in a drawer in my desk, and I have not looked at it since. I am not going to tell you what it said. That is between him and me. I will tell you that he did not ask for anything. He did not ask to be forgiven. He did not ask to be invited back into my life. He did, in his own clumsy way, finally acknowledge what Admiral Holloway had said in front of 200 people. He did, for the first time in my life, write the words I was wrong. That is something. It is not everything. But it is something. My promotion came through 6 weeks later. The ceremony was held at Naval Station Norfolk. It was small, by Navy standards. Maybe 60 people. Admiral Holloway was there. Commander Reyes was there. My chief from 20 years ago, Marcus Webb, retired now, drove down from Pennsylvania to see it. My crew from the Bainbridge sent a video. My mother flew up. She sat in the front row in a dress she had bought specifically for the occasion. She cried through most of it. She was not embarrassed about it this time. My father did not come. He was invited. My mother had asked, and I had said yes, he could come. But he did not come. A few months later, I learned why. He had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He had known for almost a year. He had not told anyone, including my mother, until after the wedding. He told her, finally, because Admiral Holloway's speech had cracked something in him that had been sealed for 66 years, and he could not hold it together anymore. He told her, and then he told Daniel, and then, eventually, in a phone call that lasted 4 to 7 minutes and that I will remember for the rest of my life, he told me. He apologized. Really apologized, this time, not in a letter but in his own voice. He told me he had been afraid of me for as long as he could remember, because I had been something he could not control or predict or fold into the picture of the family he had wanted to build. He told me he had taken that fear and turned it into contempt, because contempt was easier. He told me he was sorry. I listened. I didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. When the call ended, I sat at my desk for a long time, and I cried, finally, the way I had not let myself cry in 22 years. Then I called him back. We talked for another hour. I am not going to pretend that one phone call fixed anything. It did not. The damage between Richard Vale and his daughter is the kind of damage that does not get undone in a single conversation, or a single year, or possibly in a single lifetime. But we started. That is all I can say. We started. It has been 2 years since Daniel's wedding. My father's Parkinson's has progressed slowly, which is what we were told to hope for. He has stopped driving. He has sold the business, not to Daniel, who didn't want it, but to a partner who has run it well. He spends most of his days on the porch on Trad Street, reading. He reads more now than he did in his whole life before this. He has read every book I have ever recommended. He has asked me, 3 separate times, what I do at the Pentagon. I cannot tell him most of it. But I have told him what I can. He listens. He listens the way he never listened when I was a child. I suppose that is one of the cruel mathematics of life, that some people only learn to listen when they are running out of time to do it. My mother is still my mother. Quieter than ever. But she calls me every Sunday now, not just to talk about the weather. She asks questions. She remembers the answers. Last Christmas, she made a photo album of every news article and ceremony program she had been able to find about my career, 20 years of clippings she had collected without ever telling me. She had been keeping them in a box under her bed. She gave it to me on Christmas morning. I cried. So did she. Daniel and I talk now. Not constantly. Maybe once a month. He is trying. He sends real texts, with punctuation. He flew out to see me promoted. He stood in the front row next to my mother. He has not made a joke at my expense since the wedding. Claire has become something close to a sister. She calls me when she needs someone who is not a veil by blood to give her honest advice about being married to one. We laugh more than we probably should. Admiral Holloway retired last year. He moved to a house on the coast of Maine that he had been building for 10 years and had never had time to finish. I visit him twice a year. He still calls me captain sometimes, by mistake, and then corrects himself with a smile. He says the rank doesn't fit me yet in his head. I tell him that's all right. It doesn't always fit me yet either. I am Rear Admiral Eleanor Vale. I command a fleet support directorate that I cannot fully describe to you in this telling. I have 140 officers under my authority. I sign documents that affect the lives of sailors I will never meet. I am the second woman in the history of my division to hold this rank. I did not get here because of what happened at my brother's wedding. I got here because of 20 years of work that no one in my family had been watching. The wedding was not the cause of anything. It was just the night the rest of the world finally saw what had been true for a long time. But I will tell you this. I think about Admiral Holloway walking through those doors a lot. I think about Commander Reyes asking me, very gently, are you sure? I think about the way the room went silent. I think about Claire's father walking across that ballroom to shake my hand. I think about my mother's face when she finally said she was sorry. And I think about my father, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching me drive past in a rental car the morning after. The thing I have learned, the thing I would tell anyone who has spent their life being underestimated by the people who were supposed to love them most, is that the truth does not always need you to defend it. Sometimes the truth waits. Sometimes it sits in a folder, or a box of newspaper clippings under your mother's bed. Or in the memory of a 4-star admiral who has been watching you for 12 years and decided one Saturday in October that he had watched long enough. You do not have to spend your life proving who you are to people who have decided not to see you. You only have to keep being who you are. And if the day ever comes when the world finally notices, when someone walks through the door in dress blues and tells the room what you have been all along, you will not need to be triumphant about it. You will only need to stand up, return the salute, and go on with the work. That is what I did. That is what I am still doing. And if my father were to ask me now, sitting on his porch on Tradd Street, with his unsteady hand around a cup of coffee, what I learned from that night, I would tell him this. I learned that being seen is not the same as being loved. I learned that being respected is not the same as being known. I learned that the deepest wound is not when people are cruel to you. The deepest wound is when people are cruel to you for so long that you start to believe them. And the deepest healing is not revenge. The deepest healing is the quiet mourning, 2 years later, when you realize you don't believe them anymore. I am Eleanor Vale. I sent money home when I had almost nothing. I served my country for 20 years before my own father said my name with pride. I stood up at my brother's wedding to walk out the door, and I stayed because an admiral walked in. And the next time someone lifts a glass to make me the punchline of a joke, I will not need an admiral to stand up for me. I will stand up for myself. Because I finally know what I am worth. And no one, not my father, not my brother, not any room full of people who laughed at the wrong moment, gets to tell me otherwise ever again.